This is the UR Business Network.
Welcome to another episode of Science in the Wild. This is your host, Gary Riccio, and my co-host, Nathan Roman.
Hey, Gary.
Trying to combine our names there. We've been doing too many shows together, Nathan.
It's just all melding into one.
That's right. Well, I'm thrilled to say that we have Tom Stoffregen back for another episode because he's just doing so many interesting things, and because he's telling us about the various twists and turns in his academic career and studying lots of other things. But there has been a thread, and one of them is motion sickness, and the other is whole body control. And so I'd like Tom to tell us a little bit about the connection between those two things and how that thread is taking him to different places and different kinds of disciplines. But before we get into this, I really want to see what Tom has to say about this, all the buzz about, Oculus Rift and the immersive 3D experience that maybe is coming pretty quickly now with this $2 billion investment by Facebook. Tom, is there anything that's going to be qualitatively different about an immersive VR experience that we should be looking for?
Well, Gary, I think there are three sort of defining characteristics of the kind of immersive experience that Oculus is attempting to perfect. One of them is that you're going to have a very high-resolution visual display that's attached literally to your face. The second one is that you're going to have a sort of a bonnet, if you will, over there that makes it that blocks the rest of your vision, so that the only thing you can see is that high-resolution screen that's attached to your face. And the third and final thing is that there are motion sensors in the device itself that detect your movements, your body movements or your head movements, and they use that information about how you're moving to update the display in real time. And the big example that people give there is you wear this thing, and when you turn your head, you see yourself turning your head inside the virtual environment, and when you walk around, you see yourself walking around inside the virtual environment. That's the sort of really defining feature of this kind of immersive virtual environment system. Wow.
So it almost sounds like the holodeck on Star Trek.
It does sound like the holodeck, except that you're wearing the holodeck on your face.
So tell me, okay, so how does motion sickness relate to all this?
Well, some of the media reports have occasionally mentioned that this is not the first appearance of wearable immersive technologies. They were originally developed in the late 80s and the early 90s, and there were a few of them that were marketed in the 90s. It's worth pointing out that Oculus Rift has not yet been placed on the market. And even in the 90s, in the 90s, when these systems were originally developed, there was a lot of publicity about how this was going to change the world and how we were all going to wear these things all around and all that kind of stuff. And they faded away pretty rapidly. Those promises were never realized. And one of the reasons, only one, but one of the reasons for that was that the systems tended to make people sick. Not everybody by any means, but a distressingly large proportion of users would put those things on and wear them around for a few minutes and feel terrible and take them off. And the Oculus system is much better than those 20-year-old technologies. There's no question about it in terms of resolution, in terms of the technological development in general, if you will. But unfortunately, it does not seem to be any better than those 20-year-old devices in terms of its propensity to make people sick.
So how would your research relate to this? I mean, what do you think you can do in terms of understanding why it makes people sick and maybe which people it makes sick?
Well, my research on motion sickness is all about the connection, the possibility that there may be a connection between motion sickness as an experience, as an effect, if you will, and the way people move and control the body prior to their experience of motion sickness. So the thing I usually say is it's no surprise to anybody if a person that is motion sick feels a little wobbly and moves in an uncertain or unsteady sort of way, that's completely uncontroversial. What we've been able to show in my research over the past 20 years is that the sequence there, if you will, is in fact exactly the opposite. That it's people, once you expose somebody to a situation that might make them sick, it's people who begin to move strangely who are the ones who are actually at risk for developing that terrible subjective experience. And people who, for whatever reason, whose movements are not so affected will typically not become sick. So there's a very strong empirical relationship between how am I moving, how am I controlling my body, how am I stabilizing my head and my eyes and my torso as I'm exposed to a motion environment on the one hand, and whether I am likely to become motion sick in a few minutes or in an hour or whatever on the other hand.
So, you studied motion sickness in a lot of different environments, Tom. I mean, what is the connection between these different environments and where have you actually done most of your research to understand, what's actually happening with the body that apparently makes people sick?
We have studied motion sickness in just about every place we could think of to study it. We've done it in the laboratory with laboratory devices. We've done it in flight simulators. We've done it with console video games, Xbox, and so forth. We've done it with head-mounted displays, the predecessors of one of the predecessors of the Oculus. We've done it with handheld mobile devices. We just published a study looking at motion sickness in people using the iPad. We've done it on ships at sea, looking at seasickness, which of course is the classic, historically original form of motion sickness, and other places as well. In the classroom now, we're studying motion sickness in the classroom, for heaven's sakes.
So, in terms of science in the wild, tell us a little bit about the work at sea. How does that work? Well,
humans have been going to sea for tens of thousands of years, and the phenomena of seasickness are all too well known and all too well documented. But a few years ago, I was contacted by the University of Minnesota at Duluth, up on Lake Superior, and it turned out, I wasn't aware of this, but it turns out that they operate a research vessel on the Great Lakes, which goes around, studying the lake bed or the fish or whatever researchers might study on it. And they contacted me because they had heard through the university that I study motion sickness, and they asked me to come up there and help, quote unquote, to help them with their seasickness problem. And from that, I learned. It was an extraordinary stroke of good fortune. I went up to Duluth and did some cruises with them on their ship, and through them, I learned that their vessel was part of what turns out to be a national network of vessels, most of them ocean-going, that do research on various things. So you've got oceanographers, and you've got geologists looking at seafloor spreading, and you've got whatever you might have. But the federal government funds a fleet of ships that goes around the world doing research. And courtesy of the University of Minnesota Duluth, I was able to work my way into that fleet and into that network. And ever since then, I've gained access to these ships, and I am able to go out on the high seas and study the way that people perceive and control their bodies in relation to a moving environment. And sometimes that has included looking at phenomena of seasickness. So and I should say that through the Federal Research Network, some of the work we did with that got some publicity, and we were then contacted by the Semester at Sea program, a wonderful academic program, and they actually invited me to come on the Semester at Sea and do some research as a visiting scientist.
Now, Tom, could you ever have imagined?
No.
When you were in graduate school, first of all, working on flight simulators, and then that naturally evolving into working at a ship at sea?
No. I was not aware of the existence of federal research ships. I mean, who would know about that kind of stuff? And when that call came in, it was a bolt from the blue in the truest sense. And the only thing I give myself credit for there is that I had the gumption to take that thing when it was held out to me. When that door was open, I said, yes, I can walk through that door. And and I took that opportunity, and it is amazing. It's just absolutely astonishing. I have the ability now to send out a couple of emails and say, hey, would you guys mind if we come along on your cruise from here to there? And almost invariably they say, yeah, sure, come on.
Tom, this is Nathan. When you're out at sea and you're doing your quote-unquote work, what does that look like?
Quote unquote?
It sounds like too much fun. It sounds like too much fun.
For the record, I have learned that I am very susceptible to seasickness.
Oh no!
The irony of it all.
And it is somewhat ironic. And I have spent as much as 5 days confined to my berth, doing nothing other than experiencing the motion of the ship and feeling absolutely miserable. So I do pay my dues on this stuff. What is it like? Well, it's an amazing experience. You know, you have these very large vessels that are going out to do whatever they're doing, and we are allowed more or less to tag along. We show up at the dock, and we're on the list of approved people, and we walk in there and we set up our stuff. And most of the time, we're doing our research with the crew members. So, you know, we ask for the crew to volunteer to spend a few minutes a day with us, and they've been very, very generous about that. We find a place on the deck where it's appropriate for us to set up our equipment, and we just set it up, and we sit there all day and collect data and work with the crew. And then, you know, it's lunchtime, and you go out on deck and look for whales or something, and enjoy the clouds and the sky and the sea. And
how rough can the seas get?
Oh my! The roughest. So the sea motion is quantified on a 10-point scale, where 0 is flat and 10 is a hurricane, and the roughest that we've experienced has been about a 7 or an 8.
Wow,
it's pretty rough. We've been in situations where the surface of the sea was so rough that we could not conduct our research.
Wow.
So it gets you have to be careful about that.
I mean, a couple of points I want to make about this is that, you know, for young scientists out there, I mean, you know, you think you're trying to decide whether to go into the rigors of a scientific education, you know, what you may start out with. I mean, Tom started out in cognitive psychology. You know, you may wind up in something very, very different, you know, so it's really more about learning the sensibilities of a scientist. And actually, one might argue in a PhD program, what you really learn is how to learn. I mean, in many ways, I mean, once you go through a PhD program, the rest of your career is learning and discovering and understanding your own limits, frankly, just the way you do in graduate school.
I agree. I entered graduate school knowing to a certainty that I was going to spend my career studying visual cognition and visual attention. And 3 years later, I tossed that away, and I have not been much interested in that since. And the directions that my career has actually gone could never have been predicted from anything that I did as a graduate student. One of the things I tell my students, and I tell them this in all seriousness, and I have to tell them over and over because they have such a hard time believing me, is that the research that they do in graduate school, and in particular the research they do to earn the PhD, is going to be of minor relevance to the rest of their lives and the rest of their careers, and that's a good thing. That, as Gary, as you say, that what they're learning, what you're really learning in graduate school, is how to be a practicing scientist and how to find the questions and how to design research that can answer the questions. It's not nearly so much about saying I'm going to learn everything I can about this particular question and do it for the rest of my life. That's not what it's about.
And I'm guessing that a lot of those graduate students sort of meet that with a lot of skepticism.
Well, they find it hard to believe at first. Yeah, definitely. But you know, it's the truth of the world. And I can give them many, many examples of former students of mine who wound up doing things that they didn't expect, things that they're really happy to be doing and that they find very exciting and challenging, but things that they didn't expect and weren't planning on.
You know, and I think there's the other side of that coin on the demand side. I think for, you know, employers of science and scientists, you know, especially young scientists, you know, a PhD program is really almost like selection. You know, as much as training and education. You know, it's what you're selecting for are people who can be lifelong learners. And, you know, I think as Tom said a little bit earlier in this interview, have the gumption to really take an opportunity to do something very different. This scientists can be your best talent. They can be your high potentials. They can be people who can develop in directions that a company needs, that a business needs. The other thing I'll point out about that is, and this is really for both the scientists and for people who employ them, is that, that ability for scientists to pivot from one subject matter to another, might lead them to be doing very different kinds of investigations or be involved in very different kinds of investigations from time to time. But what really makes that science, deep science, the science that we're going to consider to be the highest quality, is to be able to follow thread. So amid all that variation, to have some kind of theoretical orientation that you can bring from one investigation to another. And this is also very poorly understood. I mean, a lot of people in academia, for example, who look at people in business, like Fred Dietrich, we had on as our first guest, who have to go from, one problem to another. They don't really understand how that can be, how you can do that in a deeply scientific way. And I think the answer is for the people who can do that in a deeply scientific way is they carry a theoretical orientation from one problem set to another. So, I think that's critically important. You don't see it often, but this is the kind of thing that we want to promote as we try to get more people in science to go into business and more people in business to appreciate what science can do. So maybe after that, being on my soapbox there for 5 minutes, maybe Tom, you can talk a little bit about maybe a theoretical orientation that's carried you from that early work in visual cognition through all these other things that you've talked about.
Sure, and I completely endorse your point on that, Gary. That from the outside, it can look as though it's scattershot. It can look as though it seems almost random in terms of the topics that an individual works on and so forth. And there are cases where that's true, to be sure. But it's also the case that there can be that underlying thread or coherent theoretical position that really connects everything together. And that, I hope, has been the case for me. When I was in the undergraduate, I was exposed to something called the ecological approach to perception and action. And that's what really caught my eye and really fascinated me as I thought about becoming a behavioral scientist. And when I went to graduate school, I wanted to study visual attention and visual cognition in the context of the ecological approach to perception and action. And while I stepped away from the visual attention part of it, I have stayed squarely within the broader theoretical outlook throughout my entire career. I am no less an exponent of the ecological approach to perception and action today than I ever have been, and that is something that is a requirement for me. Whatever topic I'm looking at, whether it's human performance on a ship, whether it's postural control in the elderly, whether it's classroom technology or seasickness or video game sickness or whatever, I always require of myself that and my students. That there has to be a meaningful connection back to a more general theory of behavior, and then we have to be able to talk about that and make that explicit. That it is a deliberate part of the design of the research, a deliberate part of the evaluation and interpretation of the data, and the writing up and the publishing and all the rest of it. Absolutely.
So when you are studying things at sea, or you're studying things in a flight simulator, or, with virtual reality games, are you literally measuring some of the same things?
Yes. One of the things that's been an increasing sort of theme for me over the past 10 or 12 years is the influence of technology on science. And a little bit more deliberate awareness of the influence of technology on science. It's only been within the last 20 or 30 years approximately that we have had off-the-shelf technologies at reasonable prices available to us as behavioral scientists that allow us to reliably measure the quantitative details of how people move. That can seem like a strange idea, but it is the case that it's only within this relatively short period of time that these technologies have been available to us. And it is the case nowadays that there are objects on the shelf, pieces of equipment on the shelf in my lab that I can take down off the shelf and use in the lab. I can take the same device with me out to a nursing home and use it with elderly patients at a nursing home. I can take the same device with me on a ship at sea and set it up on the deck and measure exactly the same phenomena on people out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So that increases dramatically the sort of comparability of the data across situations, and it correspondingly increases my ability as a scientist to use a coherent framework, a theoretical framework, or interpretive process for understanding them.
Because you're studying some pretty subtle motions in some cases.
We are studying extremely subtle motions. We are throwing cutting-edge analytic tools at them, nonlinear dynamics, and a lot of mathematics in many cases. We're talking about motions on the order of millimeters, sometimes so slow and so small that people are not even aware that there's any motion happening while it's happening to them.
Wow. And now with just the explosion of wearable sensors, you've got to be scratching your head, Tom. All of a sudden, the research that you're doing has enormous business potential.
I think it does. And the one very practical instance of that is this empirical finding that we have that we, by using a motion sensor technology, a cheap off-the-shelf motion sensor technology, and examining as little as 60 seconds worth of people's body movement data, we can make reliable predictions about which individuals are going to be susceptible to motion sickness. Well, that's valuable information if you're designing a virtual environment, if you're designing a video game, if you're designing even a physical rehab program that relies on video games or something like that. If you can make a prediction, a reasonably reliable prediction about which people should not be exposed to this because they won't benefit from it because they'll be feeling sick, that's valuable information.
Wow, Tom, this has really been fascinating. Again, thank you so much for coming in again. If somebody wants to contact you, like Mark Zuckerberg, or anybody who's listening, can you give your contact information?
Well, yes, my laboratory has a website. So if you just go to the University of Minnesota, you just type in University of Minnesota into your Google, and up will pop the university. And if you click on the main university website and just type my name in or type in kinesiology, and you'll get there in just a couple of clicks.
And we'll also, as usual, have write-ups for these shows with links to a lot of interesting websites, including other interviews with Tom. There's a really good one on the North Shore Community Radio that we'll include a link to, where Tom talks more specifically about particular results from his work. So, Tom, once again, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Gary. It's been a great pleasure.
This is the UR Business Network.